Okay, we're recording. All right. Again, we will save questions to the end. Real quick here, I have an introduction for Dr. Prasad. Dr. Vara Prasad is a university distinguished professor of crop ecophysiology in the Department of Agronomy at K-State and directs the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Sustainable Intensification. He received his Bachelor and Master of Science in Agriculture from Andhra Pradesh University, Agricultural University in Hyderabad, India, and his PhD in Crop Physiology from the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. Dr. Prasad has published more than 100 peer-reviewed journal articles and book chapters and has served as a peer reviewer for more than 35 different international journals. He currently serves on the editorial boards of multiple international journals, including Crop Science, the Agronomy Journal, and the Journal of Crop Improvement. As part of our series on scientific writing, Dr. Prasad will discuss today improving your writing skills, how to convey your research in a meaningful paper. Have at it. Thank you, Dr. Prasad.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
And then the screen is, I've started to share the screen. Hopefully it is visible to everyone. All right, great. First of all, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some of my thoughts on scientific writing, especially peer-reviewed journal articles. And I'm really excited about this opportunity and looking forward to this interaction after 45 minutes of presentation, and then we'll have about 15 minutes of question and answer. And if you can kindly mute your audio, and then if you have any questions, please type them in the chat, and then I will follow the chat at the end. So this is what I'm going to cover today. I will talk a little bit about the first items to be thinking when we think about publishing, research design, and why publish. And then I'll talk a little bit about getting started, issues with plagiarism and ethics, and then the writer's block. And then what are some of the things which you need to be considering before you start writing the journal publications. And then how do you prepare the manuscript? What are the key components of manuscript preparation and what each of those components should consist of. And then the general overview of the submission process, the review process, and how do you handle revisions. And then a general idea of a few other suggestions. And then I will summarize and conclude. And we'll have about 15 to 10 minutes of question and answers. So first things first. The most important thing before even you think about writing publication is an appropriate research design. And what do I mean by a good research design? You should have thought about all of these important 6 components when you are trying to conduct your research, whether you are a graduate student or a early career scientist. These are equally valid for all people. The first and foremost important thing is define the problem. So when you are developing your research idea or research design, you really need to do a good job of literature review. Look at what opportunity you have, and then what are the gaps in the literature, and what type of objectives or what are the objectives of your own research. And once you have identified the research problem, design your research appropriately, meaning that the experimental design which you are following, the number of replications, a clear statement of hypothesis, and how you're going to test your hypothesis are key components of that research design. Once you have that research design in place, then you have to really think about the appropriate materials and methods, which is defined primarily by the relevance of the problems and how your methodology can actually address the objectives and hypotheses which you have mentioned in the research. And then the methodology or methods which you choose should be confirmed and proven and published, because you really wanted to make sure that you're using appropriate methodology so that people don't question your methods. However, if your research is focused on developing a method or a methodology to answer a particular research question, then it's okay to be innovative in that direction. Then once you have appropriate methodology and collected all the necessary information for your research, appropriate data analysis using appropriate statistical tools, a statistical model, and how you compare various means of your treatments is going to be key as well. Once you have analyzed the data and you have the visuals, tables, and figures, and what is the key message or key results or conclusions that you want to get from that research is going to be important. So the write-up of the research and write-up publication really comes at the end of it. So to be able to publish your research, you have to start with a good research design. And I just wanted to give you a evolution of intellectual freedom or academic freedom. This is a nice visual which talks about how, as we go forward with our academic career, our thought process evolves. So before you start your graduate school, you're thinking, I'm going to do research wherever I want, which is appropriate. But once you get into the grad student and then you become a grad student and you are tied with a research program of a professor, which provides you funding, so then it kind of changes the philosophy to, I'm going to research wherever my professor wants and then where the funding comes from. And once you pass the graduate school and become the assistant professor, you are more focused on the tenure process, how to get tenure. And then you are focused on what is the requirements of the tenure committee in terms of how to publish, how many articles to publish in a year, and where do you get the grant funding. And then once you are a tenured professor, then you are more focused on actually making sure that your program is continued to receive the funding. So you're more focused on whatever the grant, where the grant opportunities are, and how you can convince them to continue to support your research program. And once you're emeritus professor, that's where you can think about whatever I want to do. And then later on, it's research and peace. So that's the evolution of the intellectual freedom or academic freedom. Now let's talk the importance of publications. I know all of you are aware of why we should publish, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of items because it is really associated with discovery, achievement, and pride. So once you are conducting your research and you identify some novel ideas or novel conclusions, it really gives you that confidence of being able to discover something, and gives you pride of achieving a research objective or hypothesis being tested in a positive or negative way. And then publications are a way for your academic progress and career development. This is one of the key criteria for getting a job, especially if you are getting into academia, and then also for your promotion and tenure, and then continued support of your program. And awards are kind of associated with your discovery. And then the third item is that others can learn from your research, because it's important to share your successes, but also it's important to share your failures so that others do not repeat and commit the same mistakes. And because under the current circumstances where there is significant limitations of funding, you really do not want to waste others' time, effort, and money so that they don't repeat your mistakes. So there are multiple reasons why you should publish your research. And this is a nice cartoon where, again, the philosophy of publication, or the publication game, I call it, has changed over a period of time. Before 1990s, it was, if you're in academia, if you're able to publish, that's a great thing. And a lot of people published at that point of time. But then once the year 2000 came in, I think there was more focus on a publication, and which was primarily linked to your promotion and tenure process as well. So the concept of publish or perish, or alternatively publish and cherish, philosophy came through. And then because the competition continued to increase, Since 2010, it was publication in high impact journals, so that your research is visible and your research is having a real impact on the field. But then once it's towards the later part, or right now, the philosophy is publish and publish more frequently in high impact journals, and maybe you won't perish because it's primarily because of the competition has been increasing in terms of receiving funds. And then I think it's equally important in somewhere in mid 2015s to now is not just the publication, but potential impact of your publication on the end user. Whether your end user could be other researchers, could be private industry, or could be the farmers or the producers who are actually utilizing your technologies or innovations. So having a real change in terms of outcomes, not just outputs in terms of publication, but actual real outcomes on the livelihood of people or producers, it has become more important in trying to get your publications out. Now here's a nice figure which shows you how the various countries have focused on science and technology as their primary focus. If you were to ask me about 5 or even 10 years before, the United States was probably one of the leading entity in terms of research and development across the world, and also in terms of the number of scientific publications which they were publishing. But after mid to 2015s, the tables have turned. This is a visual where it shows you the total number of peer-reviewed publications in science and engineering published by country. As you can see, China is leading with about 20% of the global share, and then followed by United States around 15 or 16%, followed by India, and then comes several European countries. So this dynamic is going to continue and is a direct reflection of the amount of investments which these countries are putting in science and technology. So now, before I go into the details, I would like to bring to your notice I know all of you are aware of it, but I want to talk a little bit about plagiarism and ethics while you're writing your scientific publications. It's very important. So plagiarism is taking another person's idea or writing and presenting it as your own. And then it could be an accidental plagiarism where you really don't intend to, but you have read it and then you copied that 1 or 2 sentences from there, and then you actually put it in your publication. The second one could be deliberate. Again, you don't mean it, but you have put in, you have repeated sentences from other publications, although you might have cited them, but it still considers as a plagiarism. And nowadays it can be easily detected because most of the journals will actually check for plagiarism before they even send out for initial review by the editor or the associate editor, or even the next step of sending out for review. So as soon as an editor or the handling editor receives your publication, they run it through this plagiarism test, and if it fails, they're going to reject it even before anyone else in the editor or editorial team can actually see it. So you cannot plagiarize your own writing as well. Sometimes you think that I have written this and I published this, so can I use a portion of that paragraph and cite yourself? So even that is plagiarism. Plagiarizing your own writing is also not allowed. There are also issues related with copyright and copying. So these copyright issues can actually have legal consequences. So please be advised and don't do any of these items, which is very important for your improvement of your research career. So here's just a nice visual which shows about plagiarism. I'll give you a minute to read. So what basically this says is that even if you are using the same language from another publications and provide a quote or cite it's still considered as plagiarism. So make sure that you're not doing that. And let me talk a little bit about ethics as well. I know all of you are following this, but I think just it doesn't hurt to be repeated and told once or twice again. So there are a couple of items that you really need to think before you try and publish your data. Do not falsify your results. And what do I mean by falsification is that do not manipulate your observed data. And sometimes if you have not, if you don't have enough replicates, please do not create your own data to fulfill those replications. And if you can use missing data, if you are, sometimes you may not have collected that information from that particular replicate. So if you choose appropriate design and statistical tool, you can actually use a missing data analysis to ensure that you're not biased in terms of your result. And then also do not be biased in terms of data analysis and research design. Stick to your original design in which you conducted, and use the same design to conduct your statistical analysis as well. Because you clearly know that before you actually put in your treatments, you knew that this was the best treatment design, which will allow you to test your hypothesis and objectives. And then follow research ethics in conducting the research and experimental processes, but also when you're thinking about providing authorship to the people who have contributed to the research in an appropriate fashion. And then we can have a separate discussion about who qualifies to be an author and how do you sequence the authors in a particular publication. And if you think that a certain person has not contributed enough to be provided an authorship on paper, make sure that you acknowledge their contribution of their time or technical support or whatever they have done in an acknowledgement section. And user claim of other data, including your own students or scholars. I know you're all graduate students, but if your undergraduate student whom you were supervising has collected, make sure that he or she is acknowledged appropriately in the publication. And actually, downplaying the ethics, falsifying data bias is actually crime and could be arrested and can be barred from scientific research as well. So now we understand that, and then now is the time to prepare. You're assuming that you had a good research design, you've conducted the research using appropriate methodology, and you've collected all the data, you've analyzed your data, and then now you're ready to write a scientific publications. So we all go through this syndrome called blank page syndrome or writer's block. No matter how experienced of a writer you are, we all go through this situation. So there are a couple of things which you can do to make sure that you overcome this blank page or writer syndrome. Generally, a small short outline of what you have to write and what you want to write is always helpful. And then you don't have to write in a particular order. You can just put the content outline and then start populating that outline with whatever content you have. And you don't have to start from the beginning of the publication. You just start where you feel more comfortable writing, and where that way it builds up your confidence, and then you fill each of the components of the paper, and then you're able to publish it later on. Most important item is to get out of your writer's block or blank page syndrome is actually start writing in small, short paragraphs or sentences, and then you can later on combine and make it into a full publication. And there are two styles of writing. One is I've represented by tortoise, and another one is by hare. And each person, it depends upon your personality and how you approach and how your writing skill is. So tortoises, they are very slow and methodological, and they really give a lot of thought before they write each of those sentences. So when they finish their first draft, it usually does not need a lot of revisions. Whereas you have another category of people who are more like hare, they go ahead and get writing, and then so that the content is filled, and then they assume that it can be fixed later. So the first draft can be rough, but which needs a lot of revisions. But I think no matter which type of a person you are, most important thing is to get started and overcome that initial writer's block syndrome. And nothing is written in stone. So please consider that. You always have a chance to revise, and there is plenty of opportunity for revision. And irrespective of whether you're a tortoise or a hare, most of the drafts always need several revisions, once by yourself, and once you pass it on to the other co-authors, they will certainly have a lot of input to revise the data or the write-up of your manuscript. So now you have everything. So you are starting to write. So organization is the key. Whenever you're writing a components, you have to organize your thoughts, and then you have to put it in a particular order so that people who are reading can actually follow your publication. So first, make an outline, and then organize your content, and make sure there is a logical flow from one paragraph to another paragraph, so that it is sequentially put in. But if you're not sure, then put it in components, and then you can later on read and then put it in a components which makes sense. And then before you go much deeper into that components or a paragraph, just think about what each of those paragraphs you want to accomplish, and what's the clear message you want to give into that paragraph. So those were some of the generic items. Now, before you write a scientific publication, you really think about, you have to think about where you want to publish, which journal. So there are a couple of items which you need to consider. Number one is the audience. Who are your audience? Meaning that who are the recipient of this information, and who are the people who are going to read your papers. And then what type of journals you want to publish. Nowadays, there is a plethora of journals available for you to publish your data. And then there are several types of publishers as well, professional societies, international publishers. And nowadays, in the last 5 to 10 years, there have been a lot of open access publishers which are providing opportunities to publish openly, so that the data and publication is available for other people to read upon acceptance. And then also the prestige of the journal, the impact factor and other metrics are equally important. I'll come back and explain a little bit more on that. And then also think about look at the journal and see what the rejection rates have been, and if there is any cost associated with publication, either the paid charges or the visuals, whether they are in black and white or color, and also if there is any open access, and what this cost of open access is, because there is tremendous amount of variability from one journal to another. And then another key important thing to consider is the time taken for review, and also the time taken to publish the paper after it is accepted. So these are some of the items which you might be thinking about considering before you actually choose which journal or where you want to be able to publish your research. And I'm sure that most of you are aware of the impact factor of journals, which is published by the Journal Citation Reports through the Web of Science. And those of you who don't know, you can go to the webofknowledge.com and then check to the Journal Citation Reports to get the impact factor of journals. They're categorized by discipline, and then you can also search by journal name. And each year, the impact factor is published. Here's just some of the impact factors of the journals. They range from anywhere from 1 to 20. Science, which is about 20, and Nature, Climate Change is about 18. And then it ranges from depending upon the discipline, and also whether it is basic science or applied science, and who is the publishers, whether it is open access or not. And again, I wanted to emphasize that it's just not the impact factor which is important. There are other items which can be more important than impact factor. Some of it is reach. That means that who are the audiences and how many people actually read that specific journal. And if it is more focused on the disciplinary area which your target audience read, and which you feel important of your research to publish in that particular journal. So all of those needs to be considered when you're thinking about selecting which journal. And I think nowadays there has been a lot of discussion about open access. It is coming from donors as well, and also making sure that all the federally funded research is actually provided freely to the public. So someone has to pay for that, whether it is the donor or the researcher lab or the institution which is conducting that research. So here's a nice visual which actually talks about it. Here's a person who's asking, so let's get this straight. The taxpayer pay for your lab and research? Says yes. And then you are forced to give your papers to some high-class journal for publication? Yes. And then we need to fund you again so that you can read your own publication. Yes, I told you so. So that's what it is. The taxpayers or especially if it is federally or state funded, they pay for the research. And then if it is not in open access, the publishers ask you to pay for your own paper to be read. And if it is an open access journal, you actually pay those open access upfront. And of course, most of the donors allow you to put in resources for open access. And it's something to consider, and it's actually most of the funders are making it essential that you actually provide open access for your data. And there has been a rapid increase in the number of journals which are actually now in the open access business. As you can see, these are the thousands of journals. So right now we have about more than 12,000 journals which are actually call themselves open access or have some sort of open access to make sure your data is available to others. And at the same time, when you're increasing this open access journals, there's been a lot of predatory journals which are primarily there to lure you to publish your data in their journals by paying them, paying them large amounts, but they may not be the journals which are read through by a wider audience, and then they may not have a good ethical policies and a peer review process in place. So this is a nice document to read it. And previously, they don't know how do you define a predatory journal. So there was a lot of argument, what journals do you call predatory and how do you actually define them? So in December 2019, in Nature, they actually defined what is predatory journal. Predatory journals are entities that prioritizes self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false and misleading information, deviation from best editorial and publication process, lack of transparency and use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. So at least now you understand what the definition of predatory journals are. And I actually would avoid, now you can identify who those predatory journals are and avoid to publish your data in those predatory journals. So now let's now get into actual writing of publications and what are the major components and what each of those components should contain. So the whole idea is that a concise scientific story that leads the readers through the entire process and keep them interested, curious, and engaged throughout the publication. So the 4 items are very important. Number 1, why was the research performed? Number 2, how was the research performed? Number 3, what was found? And number 4 is, so what? The significance of your research. So any paper, irrespective of the journal, you really have to communicate these 4 items very effectively and very effectively and clearly, so that you can keep the audience engaged throughout the manuscript. And now let's quickly talk about the components of the manuscript. It is different than your general thesis or dissertation, which we are probably used to. If you are doing your PhD, you would have written your master's thesis, or if you are doing your master's, some of you might have actually written a small component of research. So these are, but when it comes to an actual publication, these are the primary components of the manuscript. of a scientific publication: title, authors and affiliation, abstract, keywords, introduction, materials and methods, results and discussion separately or combined together, conclusions, summary, acknowledgements, references, tables and tables and table headings, and figures and figure caption. And then some journals also require a section on author contribution, conflict of interest, supplementary data, and also acknowledgements in terms of funding sources and the name of the donor and the grant agencies as well. So this is a general. There could be some variations, but these are the key components of a scientific publication. And now let's quickly go into what each of those components should require and what is the main purpose of them. Most of you are probably aware of this, but I think it's important to reiterate the need of the content which should go in each of those components of scientific publication. So title. I think it should accurately identify and describe the content effectively, because that's the first thing which they will see when anyone is searching using a term or using a scientific terminology. So the first thing which pops up is the title and then the abstract. So it has to capture the content of your publication. And it should not be too short and it can't be too long as well. It shouldn't be too short that it doesn't actually display what the content of that paper is going to be. I've just given you some examples, 5 different examples. I'll quickly read them, and you'll see some of it provides enough information to for the audience to be curious and actually go into the research, because nowadays you have to pay to get the full manuscript, unless if it is an open access one. So you really need to, the audience really need to know what's in it so that they'll actually pay for getting access to that. Here's just multiple examples. Impact of temperature stress on grain sorghum. So it doesn't tell me whether it is high temperature stress or low temperature stress we are talking about, and what that impact is, whether it's one genotype, multiple genotypes. So the second one is impact of high temperature stress on grain yield of sorghum genotypes. Then the response of grain sorghum genotypes to high temperature stress. Heat tolerance of grain sorghum is associated with higher photosynthesis and fertility. So this actually tells you a conclusion where these are kind of a objective or a big picture. The last one is too big, so that high temperature have negative effect on various molecular, biochemical, physiological yield traits in different sorghum genotypes under controlled environment, under field conditions. So this much detail is not really necessary, but providing enough information so that authors know, so that the audiences who are reading know what the content of the paper is. So it's very important to have a catchy and more appropriate title of which depicts the content of the paper. And the second thing which they say is an abstract, and it has to be really brief and should address those 4 items which I mentioned before. Why the research was performed, how the research was performed, what was found, and what's the significance of that. And there are clear guidelines given in terms of word limit or bullet points or the structure for abstract for each of those journals. And again, it should be written, generally the abstract is written after you have completely prepared your manuscript, so that you exactly know what the information which you are trying to communicate in that manuscript. So a good abstract is difficult and hard to write. So don't think that it's easy to write an abstract. It's actually very difficult when you have limitations of time and space, and also the format associated with that abstract. So your goal, again, whether it's in a title or an abstract, is to make sure that reader is actually get access and actually pay in some cases to download the paper and actually cite your paper. So once these are the 2 things which any person who searches will get: title and the abstract. Of course, the authors are there. And after the abstract, the final paragraph of the introduction is the other items which people read. where that's where you actually have your hypothesis and objectives and the conclusions. And then whatever, sometimes the journal also provides access to the visuals in addition to abstract. So actually they can see if the data is right or not. So you really need to write a good abstract and also make sure that your tables and figures, which are the visuals, are clear and crisp so that they can know what they are getting into. And of course, always follow the format of the journal provided. Now let's talk about the introduction. What are the key components of the introduction and how you should organize the introduction. So when you're writing your introduction, you should always start with the big picture. The first paragraph is the big picture. What's the importance of your research in terms of the big picture? What does it address? And then as you go into the second and the third paragraph, you actually narrow it down to your topic of research, and then what are the key research gaps found in the literature, and then how your research is filling those gaps. And then you end the introduction with a clear statement of objectives, and then what type of hypothesis you are testing in this research. So again, introduction is big picture, narrow it down to your topic, and then identify what gaps in research are there in your topic, and then how your research is filling those gaps and what's the purpose of your research, and then end with objective hypothesis, clear statement of objectives and hypothesis. So this is generally the way your paper will be judged. And then later, next section is the materials and methods. And it has to be written so that a scientifically literate person can understand easily. And then you have to provide enough information, not too much detail, but also not too little. So the key idea is that readers should be able to repeat and use your methodology in their research. So unless you provide that information so that others can repeat your methods in their own research, it's not going to be useful. So think in such a way that you're providing enough information for others to use your protocols. And for agronomic studies, you have to make sure that you provide the location where the experiments were conducted, the varieties which was used, and then general environmental conditions, which is temperature, rainfall, primarily, and you can also provide some soil information if that is important. And then, of course, the general management, planting date, planting density, crop management practices, fertilizer management, irrigation management, weed management, pests and diseases, so that they know that how you did your experiments and were there not any confounding effects of either environment or management or pests and diseases or stresses which would have impacted the outcome of your experimentation, the results. So the correct materials and methods in terms of if you have used an instrumentation, provide manufacturers name, city, and country, so that if anyone wants to purchase those equipment, they can actually do that. And then, of course, the layout of the experimental design, number of applications, plot size, and what statistical model you have used in your experience, in your experiments, and the significance levels at which your means are, or what type of methodology, whether it is LSDs, critical difference, or a standard deviation, a standard errors we are using to compare the means. So that's a generic items. And here you really want to avoid jargon and use normal and simple terminologies in your presentations. Abbreviations are okay, but you want to make sure that your abbreviations are actually expanded clearly on the first instance, so that they know when you use that abbreviation, what does that mean. And you don't have to provide too much details if those measurements are routine in your disciplinary area. But of course, you should try and make sure that you provide appropriate references to get more information about that procedure if somebody wants to do that experiment or methodology again. And then make sure that you are providing all the information of materials and methods appropriate to the data. If you are showcasing any trait in the data, in your visuals or the tables or figures, make sure that how that was measured is shown in the methods section. And you don't want to also provide information if you're not providing those in the results and the visuals. So make sure it matches with each other. Double check that all the information is provided. So now let's move a little bit towards the results. So I know you have done a lot of work, but it's not necessary to provide all the results in the scientific publication. You really have to think about what are the key important messages which are related to your objectives and hypotheses and gaps in the literature you want to present in the results and discuss them and conclude. So really think about that. And I don't want you to hide the data. You have to, if it is not useful or if it doesn't make sense in this paper, you don't have to show that data. But if your results are associated with that data or conclusions are associated with that data, make sure you are providing that information in the visuals. And if you think it is too much detail, sometimes you can actually provide that information in a supplementary information which is not published on print, but it is available to the audience who are looking into the online version of your manuscript in a supplementary data. And you have to use your tables and figures very efficiently so that you can provide the necessary information. Again, you should not duplicate your data in tables and figures. Make sure there's no duplication of that data in both places. One visual explaining more is enough. And then whether you choose tables or figures depends upon the type of data which you have. If it is very quantitative data and if it is too much info, too much to present, then you might want to consider with lots of tables with rows and columns. But sometimes figures are much more appropriate when the impact is visual. It could be bar graph, line graph, pie chart, data, or graphs, depending upon the type of data which you're using. Irrespective of whether you're using tables or figures, make sure you are providing the appropriate statistics, standard errors, or the significance of the data so that they know whether it is significantly important or not. And then the non-significant data, you don't have to present. You can just say it in the text that it was non-significant. And again, most of you are also aware of the interactions. If your design is complicated and you have main effects and then interaction effects, you don't have to present, if your interaction effects are significant, you really don't need to present the main effects and the interaction effects simultaneously. So if you have to go with the interaction and come down to the main effects. So make sure you're not duplicating in actually providing more information in main effects and interaction effects. So I hope you're understanding that, but make sure you start with interaction effects because those are more important, not the main effects, especially if that interaction effects are significant. If they are non-significant, then you go ahead and present your main effects. So you can discuss with your advisors to make sure you are presenting the required information and not duplicating the data, whether in terms of main and interaction effects and also in terms of tables and figures as well. So now you have written all of your results and presented them in terms of good visuals. So the next step is a discussion. Some journals ask you to write results and discussion separately, and some journals actually want you to combine. So it's your choice. And my preference has always been to write them separately so that I'm very clear in writing the results and citing my visual. And then in discussion is when I actually talk about the implications of that research and the significance of that research. I usually like them to keep them separately. So it is the most difficult section to write, and then it is heart of the paper because here is what you're actually comparing and contrasting your research results from others, and what is the most significant information you have gathered from this, and why did you get those results in such a manner, and then what is the importance of those research and how your results are actually addressing the hypotheses which have been tested. And again, you have to be careful of not over extrapolating or over speculation. You just have to think about what's the key message or conclusions I want to get from this paper, and then focus on those, and then defend those data by support of others, and then also talk about the implications of that data. Do not speculate. Sometimes people speculate too much. First degree of speculation is okay, but the second and third degree is not required. I'll give you an example, saying that you say that my research showed this, and this is because of this item, and that's where you drop the first implications. You don't have to go on and say that that you got this because of this, and that was because of another one. So don't go second, third, and fourth order of extrapolation or speculation. First order of speculation is enough. And then if you have any assumptions or the preconditions or limitations of the paper, this is where you can actually discuss or actually present in your paper before you. The final and most important piece is the conclusions. So again, here is where you want to be very clear and crisp. Want to show the clear conclusions which you want to show, and this is where you actually try and relate your conclusions with the hypothesis being tested and the objectives of your paper. So you just want to highlight a key message. It's not a summary; it's a conclusions of your paper. And sometimes it's okay to give the significance and also future research ideas. What are the potential next steps? So, and also the significance is very important here, so that they know what the implications or impact of the research is. And then, of course, the next, after you conclude the references, you should make sure that all the papers which you have cited should be provided in the references, and also the vice versa. And then generally you should have read those papers which you are citing in the references, because one of those authors could be your reviewer of your paper. And that's number one. And the number two item is you have to read the paper, because you don't want to perpetuate a bad citation. So sometimes it's easy, it has been cited by someone else, but actually you go and read the paper, it does not say that. So you really don't want to assume that if you have somebody else has cited, it is appropriate for your paper as well. So I would actually go back and read that paper, if not completely, read those important sections, the abstracts, the conclusion, and the visuals. Make sure makes sense to be included in your paper as well. And formatting of the references is very critical. Ensure that all are cited and all citations are referred, and then all references are cited as well, including the author's names. Nobody like to be spelled wrong, either your last name or your initials. So make sure authors' names are correct, year of publication, journal name, volume number, page numbers are all correct. And nowadays, some journals also ask you to give you the DOI, so that when people press that, it actually takes you to that link. So I think I'll talk a little bit about tables and figures. I told you before that it is very critical to choose which type is best suited for you. And most of these tables and figures should be self-contained, so that people don't have to go into the details of the manuscript to find out, make them understand what the table or the figure is talking about. And avoid complex presentations, and it's okay to use color, but be kind, and then make sure you're choosing the colors which are appropriate for colorblind people as well. So you have to be sensitive. And again, sometimes visuals are much more easy in terms of photographs. In addition to data in figures, it's also good to provide some pictures which can go along with your tables or figures. And sometimes it's important, because you never know. People may ask your photographs, and generally most journals do, so that they can put it on their cover page, which will get more visibility to your research. And then finally, before you submit your publications, make sure you're following the instructions. Most of the journals have clear instructions on each of the components which I have mentioned in the past. So whether it is the limitation of the title, and then how the title should be in terms of number of words. Sometimes they also consider the space, number of spaces. So make sure you read the instructions carefully. And then the structure as well, the components in terms of sequence, from abstract to keywords to introduction to conclusions and other components. And references, each journals have different formats. Make sure you follow that. And units of your measurements, most of the time SI units are preferred. And then some journals ask you to put line numbers and page numbers. And they have characters limits as well. And then they also wanted you to provide the detailed information of the software used for statistical analysis. So it's very important that you actually address all of these issues before you submit. Never assume that formatting issues will be taken care of by others and can be done later on. So it's the first attempt. When you submit it, make sure it's all done right so that you don't have issues later on. And then before nowadays, you have Word or other softwares which actually does a pretty good job of language editing. Make sure you run the spell check and any other components of language and grammar. You have those efforts in the in most of the softwares. So it's your responsibility to ensure the accuracy of the data presented. So I think it's as I said, science is important. So is the quality of preparation as well. So this really shows you the balance of the trade-off between the quality of the science and the quality of preparation. So you want to thrive for both quality of science and also quality of preparation. That has the highest chance of acceptance. And then sometimes if the quality of the preparation is bad, you have an opportunity to revise, and then you can improve the preparation. The most important item is the quality of science. If you don't have a good quality of science and good research design, then acceptance of that paper will be very difficult. This is something very important. But the quality of preparation is something which can be fixed during your revisions. So that's a trade-off. So make sure your quality science is well done, the preparation is well done, but you can improve the preparation. You can never go back and redo your research, which will take significant amount of time and effort. And once you submit, this is a general process, review process. I know Krishna Jagadish will talk a little bit more about the review process, but I'm not going to go into the details. But this is a generic process. You submit to an editor, submit to a journal. The editor can actually look at it and then say it is not suitable, and actually can reject right away without any further review. And if they think that it is suitable for the journal, they can assign to an editorial board, and then they reach out to 2 or 3 reviewers, and then the editor, the associate editor, will either accept or reject the paper. And most of the time, what happens is that you're often asked to revise your papers, and then you submit the revised paper. And then once the revised manuscript is submitted, the associate editor can directly take the decision, or it may want the process of he or she can send the paper back for another same reviewers to see if they are acceptable or not, or also find another reviewers before he or she can make the decision. So that's a generic process, and I'm sure you will learn more about that in the next presentation. And then being asked for revision is a good thing, but it does not guarantee the acceptance. So you have to take your revision chance to make sure you're addressing all the questions. Don't be overly defensive. So the main idea is to improve your manuscript so that it is acceptable to the audience. So don't be overly defensive. Make sure you address all the revisions being asked by the reviewers and the associate editor and the editor. And then when you resubmit the revised manuscript, make sure you're addressing how you have addressed each of the questions raised by the reviewers. You actually have to give a specific page number and line number, how you've addressed each of those comments. It's not necessary that you address all the comments by revising, but you have to make sure you are at least providing why you did not accept that comment or revision, and defend your work appropriately so that they can make the decision. So just last 2 slides, some other items of suggestions is that it is critical that you give co-authors enough time and opportunity to review the first draft. And then before you submit, they all should approve the submission and the content of the publication. That is very critical. So please understand that you have to give enough time to all the people who are written as co-authors on that. And then once, it's also good to get a colleague or mentors to read it, because if you're your own writing, you may not be able to find those mistakes, but others can find it easily. So it's good to get advice from others. And then sometimes it's also okay to, some journals provide editorial services, but you have to pay for it. So if you think your English is not good, you can actually pay the journal or someone else to make sure that the language is edited. They may not be able to solve your technical issues, but grammatical and English editing can be done. And don't assume that the editors or others will correct those mistakes. So you are the one who are responsible for that. Another last item is never assume that a big name author will carry the paper for publication. There are a lot of people who have who get their manuscript rejected, irrespective of the status of the scientist. So nearly all scientists have their papers released. So if your paper is released or rejected, don't simply resubmit the same to another journal. Make sure you address those comments of the reviewers, because most likely you may end up that the same reviewer reviews your paper for other journals as well. So one of the key things is address your revisions appropriately. And one of the best way to learn the review process and how to make decisions is actually volunteer to be a reviewer and serve on an editorial board and as a reviewer. Sometimes people ask me, how many papers do you have to actually review? So generally it is about 3:1. If you publish one paper, it is you should be reviewing about 3 papers. So that's how you learn. I know I've went a little bit over time, but I think I want to summarize. So I am of a mode of a philosophy of publish your work and flourish and cherish, publish and cherish. And then the best way to improve your writing skills is read others' work and practice writing. It is an art, it can be improved. Scientific writing is an art and it can be improved. And learn to edit your own writing and others. And so it's again, volunteering for review is really helpful. And abide by the publishers and journal requirements. And each component of the manuscript had a purpose. So make sure you're addressing that issue. And then when you're asked for a revision, revise with positive attitude. And then do share your own services in the process of review. That will allow you to learn from those papers. And of course, read as many papers as you like, especially those that are relevant. With that, I will stop. I know I went a little bit over time, but I hope I'm here to answer any of your questions you might have. And if you're shy and are hesitant to ask now, my email address is there, vara@agsa.edu, and you can ask me any questions I have. With that, I'll pass it on to the team. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll follow the chat box and see if there's any questions. I don't see any questions related to the chat box, so please unmute yourself or raise your hand.
I think they are shy, Dr. Vara Prasad. Folks, don't be shy. Make sure you type or you unmute yourself and make your burning questions to Dr. Vara Prasad.
I see Dr. Rice was there too. I can see.
Do you want to make any comments, Dr. Rice?
I'm nervous.
I'm listening and learning just as much. I told last week, it's for me, it's always a work in progress, and so learning from other writers is always helpful. So I'm glad. I was going to say something about the predatory journals, but then you added that in there.
No, I think Dr. Rice, you make a very important point. I think that's how I have learned my or improved my writing skills is that we all have role models in our life. So you have to follow the literature and then identify a person which you see as a role model, and then follow their publications and see how they write it. And then learn from them. I think, and you have many in our program, and Dr. Rice is certainly one of them for me. And Dr. Kirkham as well, and there are many others, but these two are the people who have influenced me. And one other writer who, I'm a crop physiologist by training, so Tom Sinclair is one of the very good writers in crop physiology. So I always read his papers because he makes it, the presentations is so nicely done. The data may be very little, but the way he presents it and discusses and presents the value to multiple disciplines gets it published. So you have to show the value. What it means is the most important thing in that, not only for your own small group of disciplinaries, but also thinking about other disciplines, how they can utilize your data and so that it can make sense to their own field. So that's why I'm also a big proponent of open data, making sure that your publication is open access, and also actually sharing the data with others so that they can look at the data from their disciplinary thing, and you'll have more impact in that sense, because collecting data is very expensive, time, effort, money, and somebody else doesn't have to repeat that experiment because you didn't share the information with.
Yeah. So I have a question, Dr. Vara Prasad, and maybe for Dr. Rice too. So using my field as example, I'm in weed science, and there is a pretty good journal, which is weed science. The impact factor is close to 2. And sometimes some people do a hard work and they can't get their papers accepted in this journal. And some people do a very similar work, but in a different weed species, and they can get their papers accepted for a higher impact journals. So why do you think that some people have, let's say, are challenged to publish some journals, but other people have more maybe ability to publish in higher impact journals? Is that a language? Is that some addition in experimental designs, or a literature review more intensive?
Yeah, I think again, there are different types of journals. Some of them are more basic and applied. I were to separate them. So for basic sciences, it has to be hypothesis driven. And a hypothesis is important for both basic and applied. But I think some of the journals would not accept confirmatory results, meaning that saying that, okay, it has been observed in rice, but I have found this the same thing in wheat. So interspecies translation, they don't see that as a new hypothesis. So that may be the reason why sometimes some journals reject that paper, especially if you have more people in weed science looking at in depth, they may not see the value of it because they may be much more aware of the nuance of the hypothesis. And whereas if it was with a broader area where it has more citations, therefore it has more impact factor, they may not look into the nuance, but they will look into the more of an impact at a big picture. So that may be one of the reasons. But again, it is up to you to present your data in a way that it is convincing to the reviewers and the editors so that they can accept the paper. So I'll give you an example. If you are writing your literature review, by all means you have to do a good literature review related to your topic, but you don't have to overdo it so that you say that everything is done. So you have to identify the gap in the literature and how your research is filling that gap, and come up with a clear testable hypothesis, which you are using appropriate methods and statistical tools and conclusion. So that's the most important thing. Why you're doing your research, how you did it, what you found, and so what. The so what is more important. You found this, so what? What does it mean? What's the impact? So that's what is critical. And again, impact factor is important, but that's not the only thing. I like impact factor. You have to have a balance. 1 or 2 papers with high impact factor, but audience, who are your audience, and how you are advancing your disciplinary area is equally important.
Yeah, I'll just, I think I mentioned this last week too, but, and I would check out this book, Writing Science, I think by Josh Schimmel, but Dr. Prasad made a couple key points there. One is what's new, what's confirming a previous research, but what's truly new. And so articles published in Science, Nature, Proceedings of the National Academy kind of have a global impact, or at least or continental impact, where if it's looking at research that, maybe weed science in Kansas, Palmer amaranth in Kansas, that's not, you have to express how that research would have a global impact, what's new and novel about that. And that's the difference. And the writing style is different too. You got to, and I encourage you to look at Schimmel's book, but you got to realize in those journals that they are for a broader audience. So you can't get too, you have to be technical, but you can't be too discipline oriented. You got to read, there's going to be chemists or, geographers that are reading those articles in how you write it and who you write it to is different, it's different. I would agree from Dr. Prasad that I've had co-authors that say, oh, I got to publish in this high impact journal. It has a 4.7 versus a 2. Well, I need to look at my journal articles, but I probably have high citations from a journal from Soil Science Side America that might have a impact factor of 2 versus an article in a higher impact journal, but it's not cited as many times. Well, Dr. Prasad made the point, what are you trying to achieve? Just publishing in the high impact journal isn't really the goal. I mean, if you get in there and get a lot of citations, that's great, but you really want to reach your audience, have an impact on the audience. So I got a couple articles, Soil Biology and Biochemistry, that has 500 citations, for example. And so I just because of high impact isn't necessarily the right. If you want to make an impact on your discipline within your science, who's the appropriate audience?
Very good. Thank you.
I have a question for both of you. I've had this discussion with some people before. No differences doesn't necessarily mean no results. And so in my research, we don't expect differences. And so that's the point. But how do you make no differences something to be excited about?
That's a good point.
Yeah, great question. I think you bring into two issues, non-significant data, and then the second item related to that is whether it is worth publishing or not. I think I would say that non-significant data are equally important because, as I said, as long as you found that information when the research was conducted in this manner, whether it is your agronomy, your soil conditions, your environmental conditions, as long as you can explain that non-significance scientifically through your other data or supporting data, it is okay. Because, for example, we all have worked on tillage methods and conservation agriculture. So you can't expect it to affect impact on yield or other soil traits in few years of data. It takes a long time experimentation to see impact on a particular component of your research attributes or research traits from the data. So you have to publish that, to say that until this time frame, you don't see the impact, but later on, you would have an impact. That's one way of doing it. Second way of doing it is that when farmer is thinking about anything adoption, he's looking at multiple things. I'm assuming that you're saying that my treatment did not have any impact on the yield. So how can I publish? But when farmer is making decision, yield is very important, I agree. But economics is equally important. And some people, some farmers or practitioners will say that environment is important. And some people will say that nutrition or my ability to have conditions, whether it is credit or mechanization tools to conduct that research. So your innovation has to be seen beyond yield. Yield, economics, environmental impacts, social impacts, and human condition. Because that's what farmer is looking at adoption. So some people might be okay to have no impact on the yield as long as I can have a good price and I can make profit, or it enhances my resource use efficiency, takes care of my environment, decreases the labor, and have a nutritional aspect to my innovation. So I think if you put that non-significance in a perspective which goes beyond your own discipline and makes a point that this research is important, then it is published.
So I'll give you another good, well, hopefully a good example. I had a student that found that one-time tillage of a long-term no-till did not change soil organic carbon. So it was tilled one time and then went back to no-till. So the perception is that tillage is going to reduce soil carbon. But what was unique about this is that a one-time tillage pass, well, I don't necessarily like tillage, but to correct a problem a farmer might have, like compaction or some erosion, gully erosion, a one-time tillage event did not change carbon. So it was non-significant, but yet it had a significant impact on farmer practices or even the science, because nobody had reported, or very few people had reported that. So I think, non-significance can be just as important as having no difference. So you have to put it in context, what's known and what's unique.
Thank you.
But it is harder to get published in some cases.
Yeah. And I think I think another way to look at it is, for example, if you really are not able to publish in a peer-reviewed journal articles, I would use that information to publish as a book chapter, or include in a component of the review so that it reaches out to the audience. And then nowadays, you can even have a podcast, Twitter, your own social media. So at least you make other people aware that this is what it is under those situations. So getting the information out is very important. And now I think you have so many different avenues to publish. Of course, it will end up in an annual report because most of the people will have to submit, so non-significant data ends up there. But again, if you can make a proper sense, saying that I observed non-significant data because this was conducted in these conditions, and I assume these are the reasons for it, and it needs further investigation. Again, as long as you're filling a gap and then looking from a different perspective, you should be able to publish.
Yeah, I really appreciated Dr. Rice's comment. I think that hits really well on what I was kind of looking at, where sometimes we do things like you say, one-time tillage, and you don't see results, and the difference wasn't significant, but in this case, no difference didn't really mean no results. So it was still a pretty interesting result. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And again, sometimes if you're using alternative technology, which is more environmentally safe, no significant difference is a good thing. For example, chemical control of weeds versus integrated weed control, or pesticides for same matter, organic versus inorganic nutrients. So non-significant or equal data is better for environment or economics. It should be.
There are some journals too that kind of publish non-significant results. I think the Tri-Societies, don't they have a journal now that's kind of encourages publishing non-significant results? I can't remember the name of the journal.
Yeah, I think more and more, most of the medium tier journals, what they're saying is that it's important to publish it. So as long as you clearly define objectives, hypothesis, your methodology is correct,
right?
It's published. They're not so much focused on the results or conclusions, but of course, conclusions are important. They tie with your objectives and hypothesis. Non-significance is significance. It's not in your control. What you observe is what you observe. Again, it's also good to provide limitations. If you say what your assumptions and limitations are, that also helps to justify your methods.
Absolutely.
All right, people, any other questions? If not, let's thank Dr. Vara Prasad and Dr. Rice for coming here today, for sharing some of his time and more comments, Dr. Rice. So yeah,
I was just listening in. I wasn't going to participate.
Yeah, we appreciate having you guys sharing some of your experiences with us. And next week at the same time, we'll have Dr. Jagadish. So yeah, hope everyone can join us again. Thank you very much.
Thank you for organizing this. I think it's good for the students. Yeah.
Thank you.